The MK party overtakes the EFF as the third largest party, and the MK party's footprint in KZN race for seats have heated up and conclusively leads that seat allocation race over there. Of course, that also reflects a little bit in the national picture and in Gauteng province. But other parties have also seemingly demonstrated and exhibited cannibalistic behavior where there have been a continuous back and forth sharing of those voters. The DA and the Freedom Front Plus have been two parties in the past whose voters have crossed the line back and forth. The DA has increased their voter tally slightly as far as percentages are concerned, not the gross final number of that. And of course, the Freedom Front Plus, their numbers are down both on the numbers and on the percentages. And of course, that means that they have fewer seats than before. Is that because they have eaten into each other's voting constituencies? Well, I don't have the answers for that, but Dr. Dale McKinley does, a political analyst who now joins us on the line. Dr. McKinley, thank you so much for your time this evening. I really do appreciate it. Before we speak about the parties and how they speak into each other, oh my goodness, it seems like we just may have lost Dr. McKinley over there. We're going to try to make reconnection with him over there. Then we will bring you that conversation in a very, very short while. We do have Dr. McKinley there now. Dr. McKinley, as we analyze the numbers of these parties, there is a overall reduction in voter turnout altogether from 66% to 58% and every party with the exception of the MK party and a few smaller parties have done well. All the other big parties like the IFP, like the EFF, like the ANC and like the like other parties comparable to that, haven't done too well this particular election. Was it a result of cannibalism between parties with similar voting constituencies, or is there other externalities to look at?
Listen, my explanation is that it's basically a result of factionalism within the ANC. If you look at the EFF, which of course was a breakaway from the ANC as a result of Julius Malema getting expelled from the Youth League. Yeah. If you look at MK, which was a result of the expulsion of, well, should we say, the suspension of Jacob Zuma and others. And then you look at the ANC, that's a 60 to 65% vote right there. The three basically ANC progeny. So the others in relation to Action SA, some of the new parties and everything else, I think the media in particular played them up a lot in the last year or 2 years because they did well in the local government elections. And therefore there was the expectation that they would do well in the national elections. But as we found out, for example, Herman Mashaba doesn't have much support outside of Gauteng. The Patriotic Alliance has very specific support in very particular areas in the Western Cape and in the urban areas in Gauteng. And then you have Bosa and Mamusi Mamane, and as well as Rise Mzansi, who got a lot of play, but I think had not done the necessary groundwork. So in my estimation, this is not a surprise. It's not, you just related how the ANC itself is paying for the sins of incumbency and paying for the sins of not delivering. It's as simple as that, is that the voters are angry, and they've turned to those that, in many cases, it's a protest vote for the other faction, and particularly MK, but also not particularly seeing the DA has maintained its vote. And I don't think it's a cannibalism. I think it's a shifting of South African politics and a decline of the ANC, and we're going to go through a transition period to something else.
Yeah. Dale, how likely is it that in some of the provinces like Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal and the Northern Cape, as well as the National Assembly, how likely is it that we will see there the speaker being from a different party than the president? And what will that do, if it is likely at all, what will that do to the culture of legislating and accountability?
Well, it all depends, excuse me, it all depends on what kind of agreement is done in coalitions. I mean, this is going to be a test because this is the first. The coalitions that were done at local and municipal level have been sort of very, very, I think, opportunistic and very short-lived and not well planned. This is going to have specific clauses there that have rules and that specify exactly who's going to get what position, who they're accountable, how they're going to make decisions. If they don't do that, we're going to have chaos. We're going to have at least a very, very unworkable kind of coalition, and you're probably going to see a lot of instability. If, however, the coalition talks and the coalition agreements, whoever comes together, is quite tight and is very, very prescriptive, then it doesn't really make much of a difference because, as we've seen in many other countries, coalition governments can work if the parties adhere to the agreements that they've made together. When the problem rises is when you have breakaways and you have others that do not pay attention to those rules. And I would say it's a toss-up in terms of whether or not one or the other is going to happen. So we're in uncharted territory here.
Yeah. And again, the split between president and deputy president from two different political parties, could that have an impact in how the state affairs are being run, specifically because the legislative powers, the statutory powers of the deputy president is that of leader of government business, and any other additionalities that the president delegates to the deputy president? It is likely that we will at this point have a president and deputy president from two different political parties. How does that play out as far as governance is concerned?
Again, we have some degree of historical precedence for this in the GNU that ruled South Africa for the first 5 years after 1994. There were National Party MPs. It wasn't necessarily at every single level, but the agreements were very tight, and so again, if you had a vice president from a different party, if you had a speaker of the legislature from a different party than the one who got the majority of votes, it shouldn't be a problem if there are specific rules, again, and they're very clear. Where it's going to become a problem is if they cobble together a coalition very quickly without having done the homework and without putting it on paper, and then you're going to try to pass legislation, and then you're going to have potentially a constitutional issues because, as you raise, there's going to be competing powers, and that could be quite messy. I would assume, and I would hope, that the ANC is the still majority party. And let's not forget, despite the fact that it did very poorly relative to what it's done, it still got twice as many votes as the next party, which is the DA. So in that case, I think the ANC needs to take this very seriously. My sense is that they will, if they want to survive and they want to come back 5 years from now and really compete, they're going to have to think through very serious kind of coalition agreements that would then cover those kinds of things we talked about in terms of possible contradictions.
Thank you so much for that. That is Dr. Dale McKinley giving us some of that analysis over there, especially when it comes to how government will be operating in a split and coalition arrangement, especially when you split up the positions between the speaker and the president, as well as the president and the deputy president.